Good afternoon. I am Wenqing Ye, Director of the Institute of East Asian Studies and Professor of History. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome Ambassador Ma Zhengang for a return visit to the Berkeley campus. Ambassador Ma is a veteran diplomat. He joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1965. He served for many years as director of the North American and Oceanian Affairs in the Foreign Ministry. He was a vice minister of Foreign Affairs at the State Council, and then also he served as China's ambassador to United Kingdoms. And then thereafter, he served for many years as president of the China Institute of International Studies. I had the pleasure of visiting with him there. And then also, it was our honor and pleasure a couple of years ago, welcome him to Berkeley for a presentation at a major conference on cross-strait relationships. He is here today at the head of a visiting delegation visiting the United States, and ours appears to be his last stop. And so I am especially pleased that he's been able to take some time off from his very busy schedule to make this presentation for us. And I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Consul General Gao Zhansheng of the consulate in San Francisco. So without further ado, Ambassador Ma, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Ye. It's a very happy occasion for me to return to Berkeley University and to this center. As you learned from Professor Ye, I engage in the relations between China and the United States for many years. I started getting myself concerned with the China-US relations in 1985. So I worked directly for the relationship till 1995, more than 10 years. And I've always followed development of the bilateral relations of our two countries. And even now, I still care about that. So I travel to this country almost every year just to talk with the colleagues how to found the relationship and how to improve the relations. And this time, my main purpose was to exchange views with our American colleague to see what would be the next for our relationship, particularly after President Hu Jintao's visit this January. As we all know, that 2009 witnessed a very good start and a rather fairly smooth development relations between our two countries. In that year, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton visited China, and her main slogan was "People in the same boat." And later, the two presidents met in London, and then President Obama visited China in November, and the two sides issued a joint statement. And that year, we can see cooperation was the main theme. But in the year 2010, we saw another side of the story. And one incident after another took place. And China relations experienced some big turn-downs. And from the press, we heard all kinds of talks about China-US relations. And some people even say that China and the United States began to engage in new Cold War. So at that time, many Chinese feel very concerned about the relations. We talk about what happened, of course, about the arms sale to Taiwan, about the meeting between President Obama and Dalai Lama, about what happened in North Korea, about the Korean Peninsula, about the different dispute over Diaoyu Islands between China and the United States, about talk about South China Sea issue, and so on and so forth. And every word and action by China was interpreted as arrogance or assertiveness to the United States. At the same time, many Chinese also have a very strong suspicion of the action of the United States, particularly when the United States attempts to come back to Asia, also called. So that was a very turbulent year last year. And then earlier this year, we have President Hu Jintao's visit to this country. And the two sides agreed to build a China-US cooperative partnership based on mutual respect, mutual benefit. And the two sides also reached a whole series of agreement and understanding on almost every issue concerned. And people broadly believe that the visit is a resetting of the bilateral relations between China and the United States. So we have a very good beginning again. So in talk about the trend of development relation between China and the United States at present time, two questions immediately came to mind. One, whether we can avoid the old pattern or what has happened after President Obama's visit to China, after President Hu Jintao's visit to the United States, because we had too much of this kind of experience. When we develop the relation to a certain height, then we will suffer a kind of lower ebb. Whether we can avoid that. Two, how can we two countries can work together to put the relations forge ahead on a more stable manner? I think probably that's the reason why I came to this country, to talk with the people, to explore ways, to exchange views, to do that. So when talking about the relations, I think we must have a comprehensive and realistic understanding of the nature of our relationship. To answer those questions, I think better to have a basic analysis of the relations between our two countries, or to see the characteristics of the relationship. President Obama called the Sino-US relations as the most important bilateral relations in the world. And the Chinese leaders have always regarded relations with the United States as the most important among the importance. In China, called the 重中之重. That means we both start to attach great importance to the relationship between our two countries. Why? Beyond any doubt, Sino-US relations are the most complicated relations as well. Let's have some facts. First, China and the United States are the two big countries with great influence in the world. Their size, capability, and position decide their function in the global governance of the world, and also their responsibility for world peace, security, and development. Their functions and responsibilities are certainly various, but common. The conception of G2 raised by some American friends has not universally accepted, but nobody can deny the fact that all important matters in the world cannot be solved or managed without cooperative participation of our two countries. So you can see the importance of this relationship. And China and the United States stand on each side or either end of the Pacific Ocean. And altogether, we have a population about more than 1.6 billion so yeah. So big in size, big in population. And comparatively now, we are number one, number two biggest economy in the world. And we all, both of us are members of P5 in the United Security Council. So that's the case. Two, there are a great deal of common or overlapping or parallel interests between our two countries. And these interests have developed in scope, scale, and depth to such a degree that neither side can afford to go without another. A good example is about trade and economic cooperation. In 1979, the total volume of bilateral trade was only $2.45 billion US. I think a very small figure in the American external trade. Even all this money was in deficit to the United States trade. You wouldn't mind too much. $2.45 billion US was nothing really. But now, in 2010, the figure jumped to $385.34 billion US, and $456.82 million according to US statistics. So over the 30 years' time, there's 150 times growth. And for investment, U.S. direct investment in real put terms amounted to $65.42 billion US in more than 59,000 projects. So the two sides often argue about the imbalance of economic trade relations. And I think if these relations, trade and economic relations, are only in the interest of one side, it'd be impossible to develop to such a scale and over such a long period of time. For 1 year, maybe in total benefit of the United States, or in 1 year in the benefit of China. But in 30 years, and the figure grows so big and so large, that means the relations is in a mutual benefit of both sides. Another example is cooperation and coordination between China and the United States on international affairs. Cooperation on international affairs was almost non-existent in the old days. I remember when I was the director of the Office of American Affairs in the Foreign Ministry, I had a very talk with my counterpart in the U.S. Embassy in Beijing, Minister Counselor. He always complained to me that since we enjoyed very good bilateral relations, but internationally, in the United Nations, China would 95% voted against us, and 5% absentee. With almost no agreement on one issue. Somehow that was true. Even at that time, China and the United States joined very strong strategic relations with the common aim of opposing Soviet expansion, we almost had not a serious cooperation on international issues. But now things are quite different. Almost all the important international issues, China and United States have very thorough, very systematic consultation and carry out a lot of cooperation and consultation and coordination. And that includes struggle against terrorism, efforts for non-proliferation of large-scale destructive weapons, particularly nuclear weapons, as case in Korea Peninsula and Iran, and also financial crisis, and climate change, and the hotspots areas like Myanmar, the Sudan, and so on. China and United States have a lot of discussion, and very often, with some mutual understanding, we do something to help the solvement of some of the issues. And some Americans complain that China failed to cooperate with the United States so thoroughly and fully. I think one thing we must remember, China and the United States are not the same country. We very often have different views, and sometimes we have a different approach on the same issue. But generally speaking, our attitude is full cooperation, not confrontation. That includes North Korean issue. As you know, China and the United States share the same aim of non-nuclear peace and stability in the peninsula. I think that's the total thing. As how to reach that point, China and the United States may have a different approach. Sometimes we have the same practice. I think when you have a different approach, it does not mean you are confronting each other. You cannot expect China will listen to the United States and follow the United States step by step in every issue. I think the same is with the Iranian nuclear issue, which actually China carries out very good cooperation with the United States and some other countries concerned. But sometimes we have different practice, different views on certain matter. I think that's true with many other things. And people talk a lot about the Copenhagen Climate Summit at the end of year 2009. Actually, you have a realistic study of that summit, you can realize that there was a very good cooperation between China and the United States. The Copenhagen Climate Summit was very complicated. It was almost a total failure, but owing to the cooperation between China, some other developing countries, and the United States, that final documents passed through. And so that turned out to be a somewhat successful conference. Actually, we have different views on some issues, but we work together for a successful conclusion of the summit. I think this is international cooperation. And the third example is increasing consultation and exchange of views between China and the United States. So far as I know, there are about more than 50 different regimes between China and the United States to carry out dialogue and exchange of views on various subjects and in all fields of affairs. And particularly the strategic economic dialogue was very important now. That the dialogue was headed by top leaders from both countries. And we already had two rounds of them. And each one, I think, was very productive, very helpful for the relations, to solve a lot of differences, to reach quite a lot of mutual understanding and agreement. And the new one, the third round, will be held very soon in Washington. And I believe that could be another successful consultation. And for the exchanges between our two countries, I just mentioned about top leaders. You know, in the past few years, there have been constant exchange for visits, meetings, dialogue between leaders at various levels of two countries. And in the 2 years, President Hu Jintao and President Obama already met and talked for 8 times, including 2 formal visits. I have never experienced such a frequent exchange among top leaders in two countries like China and the United States. Certainly, they are not just talk jokes. They discuss very serious problems about how to carry relations forward. They have just they talk about differences, and they talk how to solve differences. So that's a guarantee, fundamental positive development of the relationship. I think this is also something new in the latest decades or so. The fourth one, I put a lot of stress on that. That is a people-to-people exchange. Owing to time limit, I would not to quote too many examples. I just mentioned about students. Now there are about 100,000 Chinese students or scholars studying in various education institutions of this country. They learn the technology. They also learn the method for doing things. And many of them has played a very important role in China's development. So we are grateful to American high institutions for the great contribution to help China develop. At the same time, I think those people are also very good ambassadors to make mutual understanding between our two peoples. So I think this is not just a one student exchange. I think it's have a very deep and broad, long significance. And we're happy to see that American students in China is increasing in number and scale at the same time, even though far less than 100,000 people. But I think I'm glad to see more and more American young people study in Chinese institutions. And as you know, the two presidents just reached agreement that there will be young people exchange program. Each year there will be quite a lot of young people exchange visits to both countries. As for tourists and so on, I think there are too many. And in the United States, you can China tourists almost everywhere, and we can find Americans on the China streets almost everywhere. And many Americans even settled down somehow in some Chinese cities. I think this kind of people-to-people exchange are very important. Any relations between two countries should have very solid popular ground. Without people support, no country relation can move forward very significant. So I think that's a very important part. I just mentioned the 4 aspects of a cooperation. Of course, I can quote a lot, some other examples, but that shows that common interests, cooperation between China and the United States are the leading facts or the desired fact in our relationship. I would say that China or the United States cannot survive without the cooperation of China or United States or China. But with cooperation, we can live better. We can contribute more to world affairs. And this is certainly only one side of the picture. We will not ignore the other side. That is, there also exist great differences and even frictions, contradictions, conflicts between our two countries. I roughly put those things into three categories. One, the differences are by structure or by nature. That's not decided by one person or by one instant. They are existing there owing to different history, different culture, and so on and so forth. For instance, history. I talked with some American friends not long ago about the interference policy, China is strongly opposed interference into the internal affairs of any country. One thing is the historic experience. For the United States, over more than 200 years of development, you have never been really invaded or bullied by any foreign power. So you did not have the experience of being bullied in the hands of foreigners. While China, we have a long history of 5,000 years. We had some glorious days, but in the last 150 years, particularly from the year 1840, we had a very bitter time. A big country like China was bullied by even a smaller country from Europe. So this kind of feeling are different from the Americans. And that make us have a different consideration in dealing with the other country. According to Chinese philosophy, never try to pose those you don't desire on others, because we have suffered a great deal in the hands of foreign aggressors or invaders. So we would not carry the same practice to any other country. That is, even in our economic cooperation with foreign countries, we will pose no particular conditions, no interfering to other countries' internal affairs. So this is something grew out from a historic experience, of course, principles. And United States have different understanding. Europeans have different understanding of all this. So we cannot have a total agreement on that point. For instance, culture. Chinese culture is different from yours to a lot of aspects. For instance, talking about religion, I show great respect to religious people because that's their freedom, that's their doctrine and so on. Yeah. But China on the whole is not a religious strong country. From China's history, religion plays some role, not very strong. And now, even nowadays, religious believers only account about 1/10 of total population. And that's concentrated in some minority area, not in the Han people inhabited area. That does not mean that we show no respect to religion. But at the same time, frankly speaking, this kind of religious mental bindings are not as strong in the general people's thinking. I wouldn't comment whether it is right or wrong or whether it merits or defect, but they're fact. You can't force those people who don't have religious belief to believe a certain thing. The disadvantage is that sometimes those people, have some bad moral practice, but generally speaking, that's a fact. So when it comes to some religious connected matters, we may have a different thinking. That's life. For instance, in China, we very often have a big respect to collective things, big things. So in China, country first, family second, individual third. If you look at how the Chinese write a letter, you address first China, second Beijing, then the district, then the street, then the number, then your person name. But in the United States, just the other way around. And even in the figures, we say year, month, date, hours, minutes, and seconds. But you very often just the other order. I think it's a non-practice. So individual is respected, but we pay more attention to the collective the big collection, the interest of community is more important than individual. So in the handling of some matters, this also influenced the Chinese way, the Chinese thinking. And it'd be very hard for us to just follow the practice of other countries. That's a tradition. Of course, there are a lot of other such examples because we are growing in a different historical background. And we receive different education. For instance, Confucius have very strong influence in China, even though we had some critical campaign against Confucius, and now Confucius doctrine still fairly prevail in China. And even the government to want to have some of the fine tradition Confucius be implied nowadays. And people call this 国学, national teachings. So that's tradition. That's different from the United States. And also the choice of social system. I wouldn't go into detail about that. You know why China has followed the present system. That's his historic background. That's not imposed on us by Mao Zedong or his colleague. And we have a lot of experience, exploration. Finally, this is accepted by the Chinese people. And all this, of course, we just now talk about the Chinese model and so on. For instance, in development, we are not supposed to follow exactly as the United States or West European countries, because you have developed so many years, and China only engaged in real development in the last 30 years. And so some blame should go to ourselves. For instance, in the first 10 years, 20 years of People's Republic, we put too much effort on class struggle and so on. Yeah, we failed to carry out the real construction. But with some of our experience, we engaged in real construction from the year 1979 or so. Yeah, and in 30 years. But we follow a different pattern, and that is chosen according to Chinese conditions. We are not possible to copy U.S. practice or European practice, even though we learn a lot from you, from other countries. I think that's the way we are doing. I talk about this because this, I call it structural differences, or difference by nature. It's impossible for you to change China or for China to change the United States. We must respect that fact. If we put too much efforts on those matters and try to make two countries all together the same or behave in the same way, that's almost impossible, very objectively speaking. So I think we can talk about difference on those and try to reach a mutual understanding, but don't try to. We Chinese will not make you behave like Chinese, and Americans don't try to make Chinese always behave like the Americans. We are two different people. We are two different countries. That's part one. Another difference I called is caused by conception or principle or so on and so forth. Somehow it's owing to human being, because people have different beliefs and people may act differently. I mentioned about international issues, and we have a different principle, we have different approach on the same matter. We are different. And very often, for instance, some Americans criticize China on this and that. Very often, we have different views on the same thing. And we can discuss it, reach some mutual understanding, and cooperate on that. In China, we have saying called 和而不同. We can cooperate with the different differences. I think this is the way. And third kind of difference is by interest. Very frank, we share a lot of interests. And we have many common things. But at the same time, our interests are not always the same. Each country has its own interests. Some of them, the interests go together. Sometimes they go confronting each other. And particularly when China is developing, or some people call China rise, or China's rising, and they're bound to have more conflict interests. The question how to handle this. I just give you one example. For the present time, China's main products export to the United States are labor-concentrated, intensified products, mainly by Chinese hard working and not much technology in it. All the technology are imported or borrowed from the United States or some other country. So China only gets a small part of the benefit. The large lion's share of benefit goes to the United States or some other people. But we cannot go on like that all the time. China is developing. We're bound to have new innovation of our own. We will have our own technology. In that case, someday, or even now, we began to have a computation on some products. I think that's natural. Computation is not a total bad thing. Sometimes it's a very important driving force for progress. As we know, without computation, you will remain stable. And you cannot move forward. So in that case, possible computation between China and the United States in some area, I think will be better. Will make us more aggressive to develop something. For instance, automobile. A few years ago, we had an argument about textiles. At that time, textiles in the United States is a typical sun-setting industry. You only had about a few thousand people employed in that field. But in China, we have millions employing that. But now, for instance, automobile industry developing very fast in China. China will be a major car automobile producer. And now the quality are not so good. And a lot of them are foreign technology, American technology, German technology, Japanese technology, or France not much. And someday, probably, China's only made automobile will join the US market and start a very strong competition with the United States. What would you do? I wouldn't say that China will provoke the United States, but we must see in the development, we must prepare for that. And when President Obama mentioned about China's advancement in some technology, very frank somehow, he was literally exaggerating the achievement of China. China was not that great, not that advanced yet. But in the long run, there's a possibility that China someday will more match the United States technology. I think cooperation is the only way out. And such things, I think, means China and the United States have a very wide space for cooperation. Confrontation is not a way out for all these conflicts. So I think probably we must recognize that part as well. So we have a lot of common interests, and at the same time, we have differences, or even in some area, we have a conflict of interests. I think that's a realistic review of relations. So neither China or United States can't expect that everything will go as one side wishes. And certainly China will not cherish the solution that the United States will always do something as Chinese wish to do. I hope that America will not also not cherish that wish that Chinese will always follow what the United States wish to do. I think this is a more realistic view in our relationship. In such a way, we need to do one thing, that is building mutual trust. Only by mutual trust, we can carry out real cooperation without much trouble. If we regard China as enemy or a rival, or China regard the United States as enemy or rival, that'd be impossible to develop a very strong relations. And to build a structured mutual trust, that needs efforts both sides. It's a long-term effort both sides. So I think in that regard, at the present time, we must have a better understanding of each other. We know very well that with the constant development of globalization, the world is changing. Is changing, I should use that word. And changes has taken place in China and in the United States. So the present China-US relations is somehow different from, say, the relations in the 1980s or 1970s. That's a fact. But that does not mean the basic principle changed. I don't see very big change in the Chinese attitude towards the United States. We always try to have a strong relation with the United States because we know that by cooperating with the United States, China can enjoy some benefit. And some people say that China now become over-assertive, even aggressive or arrogant to the United States. And some people say that now China found that China is getting stronger and the United States gets weaker after the international crisis. So China wants to become very firm and so on to the United States. That's not really true. And I think a majority of Chinese believe the United States is still the superpower of the world. And we believe that the United States will recover from the crisis and will become a normal, everything will be normal again. And the United States still enjoy strong strength in many fields. A weakened United States is not in the interests of China. So I think that's the firm belief. But how the United States regard a rising China? We have heard a lot of stories about that. One story, at least what I heard in China. When China becomes stronger, China will challenge the United States in its international position. Maybe that's not original words, the meaning like that. And they regard China as the only country that could challenge the United States internationally. By President, some American friends told me that when they look back, they found a giant immediately follow them. And they're afraid that the giant will take over the United States. I told them it's not true. Maybe China is trying to follow you. But we say, oh, the United States over there. We must work very hard to catch up with the United States. Because we know what China is like. And we know what the United States is like. So that's the truth. So to China, for a long, long time to go, domestic development is still the strategic purpose or aim of China. Even though China's total GDP stand for number 2 in the world, but that was nothing really. total GDP number 2 does not mean China is the second strongest country in the world. We still regard China as a developing country. First, our per capita GDP is about 100 or so, yeah. I think the last figure I read was that China stand up on 99th position, over 150 countries or so. And some people it's 103rd or 4th position. Anyway, rather left behind. 2, if you study the Chinese economy, you'll know we are talking a lot about that. The quantity is very large. The quality is not very high. The most important thing for a country's economy is quality. Whether you have the key technology, whether your products are in a high quality. I think that's still a long way for China to do. And also the way of development. For a long time, we gained a fast speed at the cost of the environment, energy consumption. That will not last long. We know that. So now in China, we stress a lot about the change manner of development. We stress about the scientific outlook on development. That is, we want to put our economic development in a right orientation. It's not easy. That's not something can be done just by words. You have to gradually change people's mind to have a full consideration of the present needs and future of the country, and so on. Yeah. So we are doing that. And for other aspects, the total educational level, the total scientific level, the people's social moral standards, social behavior, where they are like a citizen of a strong country. And if we travel, we traveled from San Francisco to Napa Valley yesterday. On the whole way, Napa Valley there is almost the countryside of the United States. You wouldn't find too much difference, except the tall buildings. The life there is most like in San Francisco. So. But in Beijing, you find a lot of tall buildings, very modern facility. But you travel 100 miles north or south, you found a total different site. That's China. We have an imbalanced development. Our countryside is still poor and backward. We still have some poverty people. That's the reality. We Chinese know that very well. So, in the first place, as China tradition or our system, we does not cherish any ambition to be superpower or to dominate the world. Second, we still need a lot of time to develop ourselves. So we do not have the ambition, neither capability to challenge the United States. So why should we challenge the United States now? We are not able to do that. We do not have that intention. 2, China wants to build its own what they call the Monroe Doctrine, Asian Monroe Doctrine, that China try to drive U.S. out of the Asian Pacific area. That's another fallacy. I know the scholars who mention about that. It is true that Asian area is our neighboring area. We have a more interest in this area. But that does not mean we want to build a sphere of influence in that regard by China. We have no intention to drive U.S. out of this area. I don't know whether anybody heard that any Chinese or any Chinese leaders or any Chinese documents say they will get U.S. out of Asia. Just on the contrary, we welcome the United States as an Asian Pacific country to play a positive role in promote peace, stability, and development in this area. And China was ready to cooperate with United States. Even last year, when the United States claimed to return into Asia, I know that some scholars may express some suspicion of the intention, but the Chinese government still hold a very open mind. We said we have an open mind to the return of Asia by the United States, and we are ready to carry out cooperation with the United States. Because if the United States can play a positive role in the area, in judgment of your capability and your strength, I think we can do a lot together. And this time, during President Hu Jintao's visit, he talked that with President Obama, and this point is also included in the joint statement. Sometimes, personally, I think, what's the benefit for China in trying to get the United States out of Asian Pacific area? Is there a need for us to do that now? I don't see any need. I don't see any benefit for the United States leaving Asian area totally. Certainly, we don't like some of your American behavior in those areas, frankly speaking. And we found that our Chinese security may be threatened by some of the action. But that does not mean that we want to get you out of this region. And frankly speaking, we are not able to do that. A third question is, China's modernization has constituted a security threat to the United States. We heard a lot of talk on that. Whenever China have a new equipment, you heard a lot of comment and talks about a threat to the United States. And we have some increased strength in our naval forces. There have been a lot of American comment on that. And last year, excuse me, we had a trial flight of a new aircraft, Qian-20. Actually, it's just trial flying period. It's not have not put in real service. While the United States has put the F-22 in service long ago. And according to U.S. material, the U.S. F-22 is much more advanced to the China Qian-20. Why such a case that China's trial flying with Qian-20 constitute a threat to the United States security? I found it very hard to explain. And then some report about a possible Chinese aircraft carrier. I heard the story that we are trying to repair a disserviced former Soviet bloc aircraft and try to use it. While the United States already have 14 aircraft moving all over the world, that's not a threat to China, even the aircraft traveling to the water area quite near China. But China just repairing old-fashioned aircraft that could regard threat to the United States. And we China found it very hard to explain all this. Some other things. Very frank, China is a very big country with large territory and also water area. We must protect ourselves. The United States still practice a ban of military sales to China. And even the United States try to press Europeans not to lift their ban of military sales to China. How can we do? What can we do? The only problem is try to use our own capability to develop our own modernization of defense capability. And frankly speaking, our defense capability, equipment, are far behind those of the United States. And when China increases military spending, again, a threat to the United States. Anything you can say that your military spending is about 500 billion, well, China is much less than that. I just ask one thing. China is a big country, and we face a lot of problems. One, China is not reunified altogether. And we have some very difficult period when Xi Jinping was the leader of the Taiwan Authority. And he, at that time, worked very hard to try to split China and to take Taiwan out to be a so-called independent country. We have to take that in consideration. For our reunification course, we must prepare for any unexpected things. Two, around China, we found, say, military base of the United States. And the third, you can see from Japan, once take a Chinese area as its own defense space. Fourth, some country in Asia, at least they openly claim that the building of the military equipment aimed at China. I wouldn't mention the names of those countries. Under such circumstances, how can China totally give up its building for military defense equipment, just engage in peaceful development? A peaceful environment needs to be defended. So that's the case. But all this has no intention or aim to intervene or commit aggression against any country, let alone the United States. China has not carried out intelligence survey flying or along the US border, but the other way around. So this is the case. When we heard a lot of talk about China's threat to the United States security zone, I just found it very hard to understand. And frankly speaking, we have no intention. We are not able to do that. I have just one more. Oh, that's why I already mentioned that some people say that China wish to see United States deteriorating or kind of sliding down or something like that. I mentioned that that's not true. And I mentioned that when you have the financial crisis, we suffered a great deal too. So in that case, why should we to see a weakened United States? So if you just listen to a theory of this fallacy, and you found, oh, yes, that's the case. But if you come down to give it a concrete analysis, you'll know what's the real truth. So in that case, I think, I hope that the American brothers would have a better understanding of China, particularly about the China rise. Again, I said, the main purpose is for the benefit of the Chinese people, and that will take a long, long time. I think I will occupy too much of your time. Thank you very much for your listening. Thank you very much.
Will you be willing to take a couple of questions?
Oh, yeah, please.
We do have about 10 minutes for questions.
Yes, please.
Please.
You were talking about how U.S. and China's relations are based on cooperation. To what extent is the Taiwan issue a big impediment towards fostering more benign relations?
In the first place, Taiwan issue has remained obstacle in the relationship between China and the United States ever since. And that's owing to some historical reasons. We all know how the Taiwan issue comes out. It's not a question exists all the time, but to some extent, it's the extension of China's civil war, a result of China's civil war. And so in that case, we Chinese regard Taiwan issue as internal affairs. But there's an international element that means the United States element. So when we talk about normalization relations in 1978, Taiwan issue is probably the most important issue for us, for China and the United States. You know, President Nixon visited China in 1972, but the relations only normalized or have full diplomatic relations until 1979. I think the main argument is about Taiwan issue. And now I think we're happy to see that the relation across the Taiwan Strait is calming down. And the two sides now have carried out a lot of exchange and cooperation. And both sides now wish to have a peaceful development in the area. Frankly speaking, a lot of people in China certainly want to have early reunification, but we cannot do it as you wish to do. So I think we have sufficient, we need to do a lot of mutual understanding, mutual exchange, and let us people, two sides, have better understand of each other. And probably someday they will come to become one country, more natural, not then by any military action. But one condition, if any person wants to declare Taiwan independence or split from the mainland, that could be another issue. So in that case, we hope the United States, I know that America also welcome the progress across Taiwan Strait now. And we hope that the United States will do more promotion work to make two sides more closer than do anything that could make the two sides apart. Thank you. Yes?
Professor Sargent. Can you use the microphone, whoever's the camera can capture the question?
Sure. Thank you for your presentation, which was really very, very interesting. I'd like to sort of make an observation about American foreign policy, which I'll sort of flip into a question for you. One of the interesting characteristics of United States foreign policy in the 20th century is that it's often begun with a fairly clear image of how the international system should be organized, of how the world should function. When Woodrow Wilson took the United States into the First World War, for example, he began with a statement of principles as to how the world should be organized, the 14 points. Franklin Roosevelt in 1941 signed the Atlantic Charter with Winston Churchill, which is a declaration of intent as to how the international system should be arranged. And even in the post-Cold War world, the United States has gone about its foreign policy with a fairly clear sense of how the world should be organized, a world of open markets, a world of self-determining nation states. The question that I would like to put to you is, even if the United States and China can sort of agree that individual nation states should determine their own fortunes domestically, do you think that our two countries can agree as to how the world as a whole ought to be organized in the 20th century? Can we agree on a common vision of how international relations as a global system ought to be structured?
Certainly my knowledge of American history is far less than you do, and I somehow also study some American history. I know all those suggestions how United States grew up into world power and so on. Yeah. I think this is not time for us to discuss about that part. But one thing, even the United States have some good suggestions, good ideas. There should be agreement by all countries in the world, and do not try to pose the idea to other countries. I think that's point one. I wouldn't say that all the American ideas are welcome by all countries in all respects. And we can say some of the suggestions are really sound very nice, but in reality, you can see the consequence. Good example about the Middle East. And for China and United States, one thing is certain, that the present international practice or system have some shortcomings. And most of them are worked out by developed countries in the First and Second War period. At that time, many countries in Africa, in Asia, and even Latin America were not independent countries, or very poor. And so there are a lot of aspects are not very fair, not justable. But China will not suggest the overthrow of the present international system, because they won't be in the interest of the world people. If this system is overthrown, what can replace that? So in the first place, China would be happy to work together with the United States and the rest of the world to keep the present international order of practice. At the same time, we must carry out reform to let developing countries have more right in participation, right of decision, right voices. I think this is China. So China will not so radical want to a total change of the present order, but there must be improvement. That's my view. I think in that aspect, China and United States can cooperate, and already cooperate very well. For instance, during the international financial crisis, very frank, China is more cooperative with the United States than some of your European allies. Yes.
I wanted to ask what you thought the weakest link right now in U.S.-China dialogue is, and from kind of going ahead, what you think the way to sort of remedy the weaknesses in this dialogue would be, whether it would be having more dialogue, having more regular dialogue, or having better quality dialogue.
Sorry, I don't quite understand your question. I think for the dialogue, we have never short for dialogue and the conversation. Even during some different period, I think the two sides also have exchanged delegations and have very close discussions on various respects. I think you see, in the one hand, if we can reach agreement, China will be ready to reach agreement. Even sometimes we have to make some compromise of our own interests. But, China have our own interests considered. First, the renminbi rate issue. In the first place, we don't believe the renminbi rate issue is the whole cause of the imbalance trade. Second, if you have radical re-regulation of the rate, that could cause a lot of trouble in Chinese economy. And if the Chinese economy was severely stricken, I don't think that'd be beneficial to the Chinese people as well, to the world economy. So we will carry out a reform, but only gradual and according to Chinese conditions. So in that case, I think we have carried a lot of discussion on this issue, including human rights, many other things. So I said we have very smooth channel for two sides to exchange views.
If I could build on that question.
Yeah.
In some ways, is it not exactly the problem? Diplomats like you yourselves have been working hard, facilitating communications and offering reassurances. But then the very fact that it seemed necessary for you to continue making this effort, is that yet another way of telling us that in between these two major countries, the way that things are working out are not necessarily along the lines of the kinds of reassurance that you are seeking to offer?
I think reassurance is a word used by Under Secretary Steinberg, I think. Frankly speaking, for the term, Chinese scholar found it very hard to understand what's the real meaning of that. But one thing is certain, I think building a kind of mutual strategic trust somehow is the desire of the Chinese people. We think now many problems between China and the United States is owing to a lack of sufficient mutual trust. So even to some extent, there are kind of a mutual suspicion. And so this can be seen from last year, what happened last year. So I think after President Hu Jintao's visit, we'd hope that both sides should work hard to build kind of trust. Maybe you cannot build trust overnight. As I said, even two brothers sometimes won't see things eye to eye, let alone China, United States, two big countries with different background. But I think we need to trust each other. At least China will not take United States as a rival or enemy, and neither United States will do the same to China.
All right. So on that uplifting note,
Yeah.
thank you very much for this very interesting.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.